The metal gates of the Orange County Correctional Facility closed behind Stefan Wilson with the same relentless clang he had heard every morning for the past 3 years. Only now, he was on the other side. The cool California morning air hit his face, mixed with the exhaust fumes of cars passing by on Highway 405. Freedom smelled like gasoline and possibilities. In his hands, he held a worn plastic bag containing his personal belongings, old jeans, a worn t-shirt, and cracked sneakers. Everything that remained of his former life fit into a bag the size of a grocery bag. But the most important thing he took with him from that place was invisible, a burning sense of injustice that had gnawed at him every day of his imprisonment. Stefan stopped at a bus stop a few blocks from the prison. As he waited for the bus to Costa Mesa, his mind replayed the events of that day 3.5 years ago when his world had fallen apart. Orange County Courthouse, March 2021. The state of California versus Stefan Wilson, charged with aggravated domestic violence, the court clerk announced. Stefan sat next to his court-appointed lawyer, a man who seemed more interested in his phone than his client's case. Across the aisle sat Greta, his wife of 10 years, the mother of his children, the woman he loved more than life itself, who now looked at him as if he were a stranger. "Mrs. Wilson, are you ready to testify?" asked the prosecutor. Greta stood up slowly, her hands shaking as she raised her right hand to take the oath. She was dressed in a simple, dark dress, her hair pulled back into a tight bun. Dark circles under her eyes were not hidden by concealer. "On February 14th of this year," she began in a trembling voice, "my husband came home from work in a bad mood. He had lost his job at the auto repair shop a week earlier, but he didn't tell me about it." Stefan remembered that day in detail. Yes, he was angry. Yes, he had been drinking. But what Greta was saying was a distortion of the truth, an exaggeration, a lie that would destroy his life. "He started yelling at the children for the mess in the living room," Greta continued. "When I tried to calm him down, he hit me in the face so hard that I fell down." "And what happened next?" asked the prosecutor. "He kept yelling, saying it was all our fault, mine and the children's, that we were making his life unbearable. Then he grabbed me by the throat and pushed me against the wall. I thought I was going to suffocate." The courtroom was completely silent. Stefan saw some of the jurors looking at him with disgust. His lawyer was furiously writing something in his notebook, although Stefan suspected he was just pretending to be busy. "I have photos," Greta said, and the prosecutor showed the jury pictures of the bruises on her neck and face. Stefan remembered those bruises. He remembered the terror in her eyes. He remembered how his own hands shook when he realized what he had done. But the context was lost in that courtroom. No one wanted to hear about how he had been tormented by months of unemployment, how he felt like a failure, unable to provide for his family. No one wanted to know that it was a moment of rage that he immediately regretted. "Was this the first time?" asked the prosecutor. Greta shook her head. "No. Over the last 2 years, he had become increasingly aggressive. He pushed me, yelled at the children. I feared for our safety." The bus arrived 15 minutes late. Stefan sat in the back seat, watching the familiar South California landscape flash by. Supermarkets, gas stations, shopping malls, everything was the same, as if the world had frozen in anticipation of his return. Costa Mesa greeted him with hot midday sun and the sounds of construction. The city was growing, with new condominium complexes and office buildings springing up. But the neighborhood where his family once lived remained the same. Modest one-story houses with small yards where children played in the street until dark. Stefan got off the bus on Bristol Street and slowly walked toward Orchard Avenue. His legs carried him along the familiar route. Left turn on Maple, then right on Oak Street. Number 1247 was a small blue house with white shutters, which they had bought 2 years after their wedding. He stopped on the opposite side of the street, hiding behind a parked car. The house looked different. Greta had repainted the front door red and installed new window boxes with flowers. There were children's bicycles in the yard, one larger and one smaller. Emma was now 11 and Michael was 9. They had grown up without a father. At that moment, the front door opened and Greta came out. She had changed in the last 3 years. She had lost weight, her hair was shorter, and her haircut was more stylish. She was wearing a nurse's uniform, white pants and a colorful blouse with a cartoon bear print. She worked in the children's ward at the local hospital. He knew that from his mother's letters. Greta headed for her car, a new Honda Civic, which they hadn't had when he was in prison. She moved with a confidence she hadn't had before. She no longer looked over her shoulder or flinched at sudden noises. She was free of the fear he had once instilled in her. When the car disappeared around the corner, Stefan was still standing there. 3 years of planning this moment, and now he didn't know what he was feeling. Anger, longing, regret, all of it. He took a folded piece of paper out of his pocket, the address of a motel on the other side of town, where he had rented a room for the rest of the month. His parole officer, Mr. Rodriguez, had made the rules clear: no contact with his ex-wife or children without court permission. He had to stay at least 500 yards away from Greta's home, school, or work. He had to report to his officer every week. He had to find a job within 30 days, but no one said he couldn't watch. No one said he couldn't plan. Stefan turned around and walked back to the bus stop. He had time, a lot of time, and in 8 days, it would be their 12th wedding anniversary, a date he remembered every day of his imprisonment. June 15th, 2012, was the happiest day of his life, until Greta destroyed everything with her false accusations. The Sunset Motel on Harbor Boulevard was exactly as he had imagined it, cheap and nondescript. Room 14 smelled of cigarettes and cleaning products. A single bed, a TV on the dresser, a small table by the window overlooking the parking lot. Everything he needed. Stefan lay down on the bed and stared at the ceiling. He had been thinking about this moment for 3 years. Not about freedom in general, but specifically about this. About returning to Costa Mesa. About the possibility of restoring justice. In prison, he had a lot of time to think. He read law books in the library, studied domestic violence cases, and looked for ways to prove his innocence. But the system was stacked against him. His appeal was denied. So was his request for a review of his case. Greta had stolen not only his freedom, but also his children, his home, his future. She had portrayed him as a monster, when he was just a man who had broken under the pressure of circumstances, a man who had made a mistake in a moment of despair. Now it was time to show her what it meant to lose everything. Stefan took a folded piece of paper out of the bag with his belongings, a clipping from a local newspaper that his mother had sent him a year ago. It was an article about a domestic violence support program at Hoog Hospital, where Greta worked. In the photo, she stood with a group of nurses, smiling at the camera. The caption read, "Greta Wilson, a nurse in the pediatric ward, has launched a new support program for families affected by domestic violence." The irony was obvious. She had used their broken marriage as a springboard for her career, turning her story into a source of professional success. She had become an expert on domestic violence, a symbol of survival. And it was all built on a lie about who he really was. Stefan knew that his release from prison would not go unnoticed. The victim notification system should have informed Greta of his release. Perhaps she already knew. Perhaps she was already afraid. Fine. Fear was a fair start. Greta Wilson received an email notification at 2:47 a.m. The Orange County Automatic Victim Notification System didn't know anything about convenient times. The message was succinct. Inmate Stefan Wilson, case number 2021, CF001247, was released on June 23, 2024 at 8:30 a.m. If you have a restraining order, please ensure that it remains in effect. She woke up to the sound of her phone notification and read the message twice before its meaning fully registered. Stefan was free. After 3 years and 2 months, he could once again go wherever he wanted, do whatever he wanted. Greta sat up in bed, feeling an old familiar fear rise from the pit of her stomach. She thought she had gotten rid of that feeling. For the past year and a half, she had slept peacefully, not flinching at every noise outside the window, not checking the locks 3 times before going to bed. She got up and went to the bedroom window, looking out at the quiet street. Streetlights illuminated the empty sidewalk. No one was in sight, but that didn't reassure her. Stefan knew how to be inconspicuous when he wanted to. At 6:30 a.m., Greta called work and took a sick day. Then she woke the children earlier than usual. "Mom, why are we getting up so early?" 11-year-old Emma asked sleepily, rubbing her eyes. I just want to spend more time with you before school, Greta lied, helping her daughter get dressed. 9-year-old Michael was less talkative than usual in the morning, which was normal for him. He took after his father in that way. He was a slow riser and needed time to become sociable. The thought struck Greta. She tried not to think about how much the children resembled Stefan. At breakfast, Greta watched the street through the kitchen window. Every car that drove by made her tense. Every passerby could be them. Mom, are you okay? Emma asked, noticing her mother's nervousness. Everything's fine, honey. Just thinking about work. After the children left for school, Greta called Linda Harris, her neighbor and best friend. Linda lived across the street and was the only person who knew the whole truth about Greta's marriage. He left, Greta said without preamble when Linda picked up the phone. There was a pause on the other end of the line. When? Yesterday morning. I got the notice last night. Oh my God. How are you feeling? Scared, Greta admitted honestly. I thought I'd be ready for this day, but do you want me to come over? Yes, please. Linda was at Greta's 10 minutes later, bringing coffee and cookies from the bakery on the corner. At 28, Linda was younger than Greta, but she had a practicality and decisiveness that Greta sometimes lacked. Is the restraining order still in effect? Linda asked, settling into the kitchen. Yes, until the end of the year, but you know it's just a piece of paper. Still, it's better than nothing. Have you been in touch with Detective Collins? Greta shook her head. I don't know if it's worth it. Stefan didn't technically do anything. Not yet, Linda corrected, but we both know what he's like. Linda was not only a witness in court, but also in real life. She had lived across the street from the Wilson family for the past 5 years, and had seen Stefan change. At first, he was a normal neighbor, friendly, willing to help with groceries or fix something that was broken. But gradually, something in him changed. Do you remember that day in November 2020? Linda asked. When I saw you in the garden with a black eye and you said you'd fallen? Greta remembered. It was 3 months before the incident that led to Stefan's arrest. At that time, she still hoped that she could handle the situation herself, that Stefan would change, that the family would stay together. I should have insisted that you go to the police, Linda continued. Maybe then everything would have been different. Don't blame yourself. I wasn't ready then. The thing was, Linda saw more than Greta let on. She heard the screams through the thin walls of the houses, saw the Wilson children playing more quietly than usual in the yard after particularly loud arguments. She noticed how Greta wore long sleeves even on hot days. The most frightening episode Linda witnessed occurred a week before Stefan's arrest. She was returning home from the night shift at the hospital. Linda worked as a lab technician and saw Stefan dragging Greta out of the house by her hair. If you dare to contradict me again, he shouted, not noticing that they were being watched. Greta cried, begging him to stop, saying that the children would wake up. Stefan only let her go when the lights came on in the neighbor's house on the left. Even then, Greta did not go to the police. It took another incident, a more serious one, for her to finally make up her mind. Linda, Greta said, interrupting her friend's recollections. What if he tries to take the children? He has no right to see them. The court took away his parental rights. But what if he just takes them? What if he comes to school? Linda took Greta's hand in hers. Then we'll call the police. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. Maybe he just wants to start a new life somewhere else. But Greta knew Stefan better than that. He wasn't the kind of man who let go of the past easily. Even during the good times of their marriage, he could hold a grudge for months over minor slights, bring up old arguments, and demand apologies for words spoken in anger. In prison, he became even worse. The few letters he sent her during his first year behind bars were filled with bitterness and accusations. He blamed her for destroying the family, for the children growing up without a father, for ruining his reputation. The letters stopped only after Greta obtained a restraining order prohibiting him from contacting her. I think I should pick up the kids from school early today, Greta said. Good idea. Then what? I don't know. Maybe we'll go to my sister's in San Diego for a few days. Greta, you can't run away every time you feel threatened. This is your home, your life. But the children need stability. They've been through enough. Linda was right, but that didn't make the fear any less real. Greta remembered how Stefan could spend hours planning something, thinking through every detail. When he was really angry, he didn't act impulsively. He waited, choosing the moment when he could cause the most pain. At 2:30 p.m., Greta drove to school to pick up the children. Costa Mesa Elementary School was small, and all the teachers knew about the Wilson family. The principal, Mrs. Patterson, even had a photo of Stefan with instructions never to release the children to him. "Mom, why are we leaving so early?" Michael asked as they got into the car. "I just want to spend some time at home together," Greta lied again. At home, the children did their homework in the kitchen while Greta prepared dinner. She tried to maintain a normal atmosphere, but she was constantly listening for sounds from the street. Every time a car door slammed or a dog barked, she froze. At 6 p.m., the home phone rang. Greta looked at the caller ID, an unknown number. She didn't answer. The phone rang again 5 minutes later, and then again 10 minutes later. "Mom, why aren't you answering?" Emma asked. "Probably just salespeople," Greta replied. But she knew it wasn't salespeople. When the phone rang for the 4th time, she picked it up but didn't say anything. "Greta?" The voice was familiar, but different. 3 years in prison had made it rougher, harsher. She hung up immediately, her hands shaking. Stefan knew their home number, of course. He had lived here for 10 years. The phone rang again. This time Greta pulled the cord out of the socket. "Mom, what's going on?" Emma looked alarmed. Greta realized she couldn't hide the truth any longer. The children had to know that their father was back. They had to be careful. "Kids, sit down. I have something to tell you." She sat down next to them on the sofa in the living room, searching for the right words. How could she explain to her children that the man who was supposed to protect them could now be a danger to them? "Your father got out of prison yesterday." Michael frowned. "Dad was in prison?" Emma was older. She remembered more. "Because of what he did to you?" Greta nodded. "Yes. And now that he's free, we need to be very careful. If you see him anywhere, at school, on the street, in a store, call an adult immediately. Don't go near him, don't talk to him." "But he's our dad," Michael said quietly. "I know, dear, but sometimes people change, and not always for the better." Emma took her mother's hand. "Does he want to hurt us?" "I don't know what he wants, but I'm not going to risk your safety." The rest of the evening passed in tense silence. The children were not in the mood for games or television. Michael asked a lot of questions about his father that Greta didn't know how to answer. Emma was unusually quiet, which worried Greta even more. After the children went to bed, Greta checked all the locks in the house twice. She drew the curtains so that no one could see inside. Then she sat down in the kitchen with a cup of tea she didn't drink and thought about what to do next. Tomorrow she would call Detective Collins. Tomorrow she would find out where Stefan lived and make sure he was complying with the terms of the restraining order. Tomorrow she would start taking steps to protect her family. But tonight, she just sat in the dark, listening to the sounds of the night, remembering what it was like to be afraid of the man she had once loved more than anything in the world. Across the street, Linda Harris was also awake. She stood at her bedroom window, watching Greta's house. At 11:30 p.m., she noticed a dark figure on the opposite side of the street, standing in the shadows between 2 parked cars. The figure stood there for almost an hour, motionless, just watching Greta's house. Linda couldn't make out the face in the darkness, but she knew who it was. Stefan Wilson had come home. Detective Mark Collins received a call from Greta Wilson on Thursday morning, exactly 3 days after Stefan's release. He was sitting at his desk at the Costa Mesa Police Department, studying photos from the Newport Avenue break-in, when his direct line rang. "Detective Collins," he answered, without looking up from his documents. "Detective, this is Greta Wilson. Do you remember my case?" Collins put the photos aside. Of course he remembered. The Wilson case was one of those that stayed with you, not because of the complexity of the investigation. The evidence was clear, the testimony was solid. It was because of what he had seen in this woman's eyes when she gave her statement. Fear that had dug so deep it had become part of her being. Mrs. Wilson, of course, what happened? He's out. Stefan was released 3 days ago. Collins already knew that. The notification system worked for law enforcement officers too. I'm aware. Has he been in touch with you? He called home last night, several times, and my neighbor saw him standing outside the house last night. Collins picked up a pen and opened a new notebook. At 45, he had been a detective for 18 years, and experience had taught him that release from prison was often the beginning of new problems, not the end of them. Is the restraining order still in effect? Yes, until December. Good. Phone calls and watching the house are violations of the order. I'll talk to his parole officer. What's your neighbor's name? Linda Harris. She lives across the street at 1252. Collins wrote down the information. I'll come by this afternoon to talk to you and Mrs. Harris. In the meantime, if he shows up at your house or calls, call 911 right away. After talking to Greta, Collins called the parole department. Officer Stefana's supervisor, Carlos Rodriguez, was an experienced officer who didn't like it when his parolees caused problems. Wilson? Rodriguez asked. Yes, I have him. He was released on Monday and we meet every Wednesday. He was at the reception yesterday and was acting normal. He's violating a restraining order. Calls to his ex-wife watching her house. Damn. I knew there would be trouble with him. The guy claimed he was innocent the whole time, that his wife framed him. Where does he live? The Sunset Motel on Harbor Boulevard. Want to go check him out? Give me the address. I'll meet you there in an hour. The Sunset Motel lived up to its reputation as a place where people stayed when they had nowhere else to go. Collins parked next to Rodriguez's beat-up pickup truck and looked around. The parking lot was half empty, and several rooms showed signs of long-term occupancy. Laundry hanging on lines, flower pots by the doors. Room 14 was on the first floor, at the end of the row. Rodriguez knocked on the door. 3 sharp knocks. Stefan, it's Carlos. Open up. The door opened a few seconds later. Stefan Wilson looked exactly as Collins had imagined, thin from prison food, with the wary look of a man accustomed to constant danger. His hair was shorter than in the photos from 3 years ago, and wrinkles had appeared around his eyes. Carlos, we're meeting tomorrow, Stefan said, noticing Collins. Who's this? Detective Collins from the Costa Mesa Police Department. Can we come in? Stefan hesitated but stepped aside. The room was even more shabby inside than outside. The only personal item Collins noticed was a newspaper clipping on the table, an article about a domestic violence program at the hospital where Greta worked. Stefan, Rodriguez began, I've been told you're violating a restraining order. I haven't violated anything. Calls to your ex-wife, surveillance of her home. That's a direct violation. Stefan sat down on the edge of the bed, his arms crossed over his chest. I didn't call anyone. Collins studied his face. After so many years on the job, he had learned to read people. Stefan was lying, but he did so confidently, like a man accustomed to not being believed. Your ex-wife said you called her last night, several times. Maybe someone else called. Maybe she made it up to get me in trouble. It's not the first time. Collins felt a familiar irritation. 3 years ago, Stefan had used the same tactics: denial, victim blaming, playing innocent. It hadn't worked then, and it wouldn't work now. What about surveillance of the house? The neighbor saw you. I was walking around the neighborhood. That's not against the law. Within 500 yards of your ex-wife's house is against the law, Rodriguez interjected. Stefan, I warned you at our first meeting. No contact, no attempts to approach the family. I understand. Understanding is not the same as agreeing, Collins remarked. Where were you last night between 6 o'clock and 11 p.m.? Here, watching television. Can anyone confirm that? The motel manager, I guess, or other guests. Collins knew that without direct evidence, they couldn't press charges. A neighbor's testimony and calls from an unknown number weren't enough to make an arrest, but it was enough for a warning. Stefan, listen carefully, he said, leaning forward. I know what you did 3 years ago. I saw the photos of the bruises on your wife's neck. I heard the recordings of her testimony. If you think you can pick up where you left off, you're seriously mistaken. I served my time. time for that particular crime. But if you violate the restraining order, if you try to contact Greta or the children, I will personally see to it that you go back behind bars, and next time, the sentence will be longer." Stefan looked at him with ill-concealed hatred. "You all decided I was guilty before the trial. No one wanted to hear my side of the story. Your side was heard in court. The jury didn't believe it. The jury believed lies." Rodriguez stood up. "Enough, Stefan. This conversation is over. I'm increasing the frequency of our meetings to twice a week. And if I get one more complaint, you're going back to prison for violating the terms of your release." When they left the room, Collins felt Stefan watching them from the window. The feeling stayed with him until he got to his car. "What do you think?" Rodriguez asked. "I think he's dangerous. And I think we don't have much time." "Not much time before what?" "Before he does something that can't be fixed." After meeting with Rodriguez, Collins drove to Greta Wilson's house. The house on Oak Street looked peaceful in the daylight. Children's bicycles in the yard, potted flowers on the porch. But the detective noticed new details: tightly drawn curtains, an extra lock on the front door. Greta opened the door, leaving the chain on. When she saw Collins, she removed it and let him in. "How are the children?" he asked first. "Scared. Emma hardly slept last night. Michael is asking a lot of questions that I don't know how to answer." They sat down in the living room. Collins noticed that Greta had chosen an armchair from which she could see the entrance and was constantly glancing at the windows. "I spoke to Stefan this morning. He denies making any calls or watching you. I knew he would deny it. But now he knows we're watching. That might make him more cautious or more desperate." Greta wrapped her arms around herself. "Detective, you don't know Stefan the way I do. When he's set his mind on something, he doesn't back down. He might wait, he might plan, but he doesn't back down." "What do you think he might be planning?" "I don't know, but it's our wedding anniversary soon, June 15th. It was an important day for him. He made a big deal out of it every year if I forgot or didn't make it special enough." Collins wrote down the date. "That's 9 days from now." "Yes, and I'm afraid he's planning something for that day." "Why do you think so?" Greta paused, searching for the right words. "In the months before his arrest, he became obsessed with our relationship. He constantly talked about how we used to be, accused me of changing, of destroying what we had. And our wedding day was a symbol of that time when, in his opinion, we were happy. Were you happy?" "The first few years, yes, or I thought I was, but then I realized that his love was possessive. He didn't love me. He loved the idea of owning me." Collins nodded. He had seen relationships like this before. Men who confused control with care, jealousy with love. "Greta, I want you to consider leaving town temporarily, until he's settled in. I've thought about it, but the kids don't want to leave school or their friends, and I can't just quit my job. Safety is more important than your job." "That's easy for you to say. I have responsibilities, a mortgage, bills. I can't just disappear." Collins understood her position. Victims of domestic violence often found themselves trapped not only emotionally, but also economically. Running away meant losing income, stability, and community support. "Then we need to maximize your security here. I'll ask patrol cars to drive by your street more often. Install a security camera at the entrance. And most importantly, if you see him, call 911 immediately." After talking to Greta, Collins crossed the street to Linda Harris's house. The woman who opened the door was young, with a determined expression and alert eyes. "Are you Detective Collins? Greta said you'd be here." They sat down in the kitchen, from where they had a good view of Greta's house. "Tell me what you saw the night before last." "It was around 11:30. I couldn't sleep, so I got up to get a drink of water and looked out the window. Across the street, between two cars, there was a dark figure." "Are you sure it was a person?" "Absolutely. He wasn't moving, just standing there looking at Greta's house. He stood there for over an hour." "Could you make out his features?" "No, it was too dark. But his height and build matched Stefan's description." "Why didn't you call the police?" Linda hesitated. "To be honest, I wasn't entirely sure. I thought maybe it was someone else." "But now you think differently?" "Now that I know he's out and called Greta, yes. I think it was him." Collins asked a few more questions and told Linda to call immediately if she saw anything suspicious. That evening, Stefan Wilson sat in his motel room and made a plan. On the table in front of him were several sheets of paper with notes: Greta's schedule, the children's routes to and from school, the times when the neighbors left for work. 3 years in prison had taught him patience and planning. He had had plenty of time in his cell to think through every detail and imagine every scenario. The visit from Collins and Rodriguez that morning had only confirmed that he needed to be more careful, but he had no intention of backing down. June 15th. 12 years ago on this day, Greta stood at the altar in a white dress and promised to love him until death. In sickness and in health, in poverty and in wealth, in sickness and in health. She broke every one of those promises. Stefan took a folded piece of paper out of his pocket, a copy of their marriage certificate, which he had kept all these years. The document was worn from being folded and unfolded so many times, but the words were still clearly visible. There were 8 days left until the anniversary, enough time to finish his preparations. Stefan took a pen and began to write a plan on a new piece of paper. He underlined the first point twice: June 15th, the day of reckoning. Greta Wilson woke up at 5:47 a.m. from a nightmare in which Stefan was standing by her bed with the same expression he had on his face on that last night before his arrest. Her heart was beating so loudly that she was sure it would wake the children in the next room. 12 years ago on this day, she was the happiest woman in the world. A white dress, flowers, promises of eternal love in the small St. Patrick's Church on the outskirts of Costa Mesa. Stefan was handsome in his rented tuxedo, and when he said his vows, there were tears in his eyes. "I promise to love you until the last day of my life," he said, holding her hands in his. Now those words sounded like a threat. Greta stood up and walked over to the window. The street was quiet, with only the occasional car passing by. A police patrol car drove by at 6:15 a.m. Detective Collins had kept his promise to increase surveillance, but Greta knew the police couldn't be there all the time. She made breakfast for the children, trying to look calm. Emma was unusually quiet, and Michael asked why his mother was so nervous. "Just tired, dear," she lied, pouring him orange juice. "Mom, can Dad really come here?" Emma asked. "No, sweetheart. He's not allowed to come near our house." "What if he doesn't listen?" Greta sat down next to her daughter. "Then we'll call the police, and they'll stop him." But even as she said the words, Greta knew how empty they were. The police could arrive in 5 minutes, 3 if she was lucky. But Stefan would only need 30 seconds to do what he had planned. At 10 a.m., Greta drove the children to Linda's parents' house on the other side of town. Officially, it was a regular Saturday visit to Grandma and Grandpa Harris, as the children called them. In reality, it was a precaution. "See you tonight," she said, hugging the children at the Harrises' doorstep. "Mom, are you sure you'll come?" Michael asked, sensing his mother's anxiety. "Of course I will. Mom just has a lot to do today." Greta returned home around noon. The house seemed too quiet without the children's voices. She checked all the locks, made sure the windows were closed and that the phone was working. Then she sat down in the living room with a cup of coffee and tried to read, but the words floated before her eyes. At 2 p.m., Linda called. "How are you? Are you holding up?" "I'm trying. Thank you for taking the kids." "Of course. Listen, maybe you should leave for today too? Come over to our place." "No, if I start running, I'll never stop. This is my home." "Greta, I'll be fine. I have 911 on speed dial, and Detective Collins said the patrols would be by every 2 hours. After talking to Linda, Greta tried to do some housework. She did the laundry, cleaned the kids' rooms, and made dinner, even though she wasn't hungry. All the while, she listened for sounds from the street. At 4 p.m., another patrol car drove by. The officer waved at her when he saw her in the window. That calmed her down a little. At 6 p.m., it started to rain, a summer thunderstorm typical of Southern California. Greta closed all the windows and turned on the TV for background noise. The sound of rain on the roof was soothing, but it also masked other sounds. Stefan Wilson sat in his car in the parking lot of a supermarket 4 blocks from Greta's house, waiting for darkness. He had bought this old Honda Accord for cash 3 days ago from a junkie who needed quick money. The car ran, the license plates were clean, and the papers were in order. Most importantly, Greta didn't know what it looked like. He had spent the week studying the patrol car schedule. They drove down Oak Street every 2 hours, 10 o'clock, 12 o'clock, 14 o'clock, 16 o'clock, 18 o'clock, 20 o'clock. The next patrol would be at 10 p.m. He had almost 2 hours. At 8:15 p.m., Stefan left the parking lot and slowly drove through familiar streets. The rain was getting heavier, which was convenient. Fewer people on the streets, poorer visibility, more noise to mask sounds. He parked 3 blocks from Greta's house, in a dark alley between 2 apartment buildings. From there, it was a 5-minute walk through backyards and alleys to the house, a route he had planned and mentally rehearsed dozens of times. Stefan checked the contents of his pockets, the lock picks his cellmate had taught him to use, a flashlight, gloves, and a knife. A regular kitchen knife with a 4-inch blade bought at the same supermarket. He hadn't planned to kill Greta, at least not right away. First, he wanted to talk to her, explain what she had done, make her understand the pain she had caused him and the children. But he had the knife just in case. If she tried to scream, if she tried to run away, if she wouldn't listen. At 8:30, Stefan left the car and began his walk home. Greta was dozing in front of the TV when she heard a noise. At first, she thought it was rain or wind, but then she realized someone was trying to open the back door. She froze, her heart beating so loudly it drowned out all other sounds. Maybe she was imagining things. Maybe it was just a tree branch scraping against the window. The sound repeated itself. A metallic click. Someone was working on the lock. Greta slowly got up from the chair, trying not to make a sound. The phone was on the kitchen table, and the kitchen was next to the back door. She had to pass the place where someone had tried to get in. Another click. Then silence. Greta tiptoed toward the kitchen, pressing herself against the wall. She had almost reached the phone when she heard the sound of a door opening. He came in. "Greta?" Stefan's voice was quiet, almost gentle. "I know you're here. Where are the kids?" Greta grabbed the phone and started dialing 911, but her hands were shaking so badly that she pressed the wrong buttons. She tried again. "Greta, don't make me look for you, I just need to talk." He was in the kitchen now, just a few steps away from her. Greta could see his silhouette in the doorway, the same height, the same gait, but something about him had changed. He moved more slowly, more cautiously, like a predator stalking its prey. 911, what's happening? The operator's voice on the phone sounded like the most beautiful sound in the world to Greta. "My ex-husband is in the house," she whispered. 1247 Oak Street, Costa Mesa. Please help. "Ma'am, are you safe? Can you leave the house?" Stefan heard her voice and turned toward her. In the light from the street lamp shining through the window, Greta saw the expression on his face. It wasn't the anger she had expected. It was something much worse, cold determination. "Hang up, Greta," he said calmly. "No. Hang up or I'll do what I didn't want to do." He took a knife out of his pocket. The blade glinted in the dim light. "Ma'am? Ma'am, are you there?" The dispatcher's voice sounded so distant. "He's here," Greta whispered into the receiver. "He has a knife." "A patrol car is on its way, ma'am. Try to stay on the line." Stefan took a step forward. 12 years ago today, you promised to love me until death. Remember?" "Stefan, please. I spent 3 years in prison for what you think I did. 3 years while you built a new life, while my children forgot what their father looked like. The children haven't forgotten you. Don't lie to me." His voice grew louder, but not shrill. Controlled rage was scarier than uncontrolled rage. "You poisoned them against me. You made me a monster in their eyes." Greta slowly backed into the living room, holding the phone. "I never said anything bad about you to the children. But you didn't say anything good either. You made them forget that I was their father. You made me afraid of you." Stefan stopped. Pain flashed across his face. Real, deep pain. "I never wanted you to be afraid of me. I loved you." That wasn't love, Stefan. It was possession. What is love if not the desire to possess what is dear to you? What is love without jealousy, without fear of loss? Greta continued to retreat, but Stefan followed her step for step. The distance between them remained the same. "Where's the police?" she whispered into her phone. 3 minutes to arrival," replied the operator. 3 minutes. It was an eternity. "Do you know what I've been thinking about for the last 3 years?" Stefan continued. "I thought about how I would come home, how we would talk, how I would explain to you that you were wrong, how we would start over. Stefan, we can't start over. Too much has happened." "Yes, too much, and it needs to be fixed." He raised the knife. At that moment, Greta realized that talking wouldn't help. Stefan hadn't come to explain himself or start over. He had come to finish what he had started 3 years ago. She rushed to the front door, but Stefan was faster. He grabbed her by the shoulder and turned her toward him. "Don't run away from me, Greta. Not now. Let me go." "I can't. If I let you go now, you'll run away again. You'll lie about me again." Greta tried to break free, but his grip was iron. The phone fell from her hand and hit the floor. "Ma'am? Ma'am?" The operator's voice sounded so distant. "You know what I thought about most in prison?" Stefan pinned her against the wall. "How you lied in court. How you looked at the jury with those innocent eyes and told them what a monster I was. I didn't lie. You did. You turned one bad day into a story of years of abuse. You turned a moment of weakness into a portrait of a monster. It wasn't one day, Stefan, it was months. Months of what? I never laid a hand on you before that night. You didn't lay a hand on me, but what? You yelled? Everyone yells. You were jealous? Everyone is jealous. I was just a husband going through a difficult time." Greta could see in his eyes that he sincerely believed what he was saying. 3 years in prison had not changed his understanding of what had happened. On the contrary, they had strengthened his conviction that he was right. "Stefan, the police are on their way. If you leave now, I'm not going anywhere. I've come home. This isn't your home anymore." "No?" He smiled, but the smile was scarier than anger. "I bought this house. I renovated this kitchen. I assembled the cribs for the children in their rooms. This is my house more than yours." Sirens could be heard in the distance. Stefan heard them too. "So we don't have much time," he said, and raised the knife. Greta screamed and tried to push him away, but he was stronger. The knife flashed in the lamplight. "I wanted us to talk," Stefan said almost regretfully. "I wanted you to understand, but you called the police again. You chose them over me again. Stefan, please don't." "You promised to love me until death," he whispered. "It's time to keep your promise." The knife entered her body under her ribs, sliding between the bones toward her heart. Greta felt a sharp pain, then a strange warmth spreading across her chest. She fell to her knees, pressing her hands against the wound. Blood seeped between her fingers. "Stefan," she said weakly. He stood over her, the knife still in his hand. The expression on his face changed. The anger disappeared, leaving only emptiness. "I didn't want to," he said, "but you didn't give me a choice." The sirens grew louder. Red and blue lights flashed outside the windows. Stefan looked at the knife in his hand, then at Greta. She lay on the floor, her breathing becoming shallower. "I love you," he said. "I've always loved you." Then he dropped the knife and ran to the back door. Greta lay on the living room floor, feeling the life drain from her. She thought of her children, of how they were waiting for her at the Harris's house, of how they would have to grow up without a mother, just as they had grown up without a father. The front door burst open under the blows of the police. Officers rushed inside with their guns drawn. "Here!" one of them shouted when he saw Greta. They bent over her, one of the officers pressing his hands against the wound, trying to stop the bleeding. Another spoke into his radio. "Ambulance needed. Penetrating chest wound. Victim unconscious." But Greta could no longer hear their voices. The last thing she thought of was Emma and Michael's faces as they said goodbye that morning. Stefan Wilson had disappeared into the night, leaving behind only blood on the floor of the house that had once been their family home and the shattered lives of the people who had once loved him. Detective Mark Collins arrived at the scene at 9:47 p.m., 20 minutes after the emergency call. The house at 1247 Oak Street was cordoned off with yellow tape. Patrol cars filled the quiet street, and neighbors gathered at a safe distance, whispering and pointing at the house. Greta Wilson's body lay in the living room in a pool of blood. The medical examiner had already arrived and made a preliminary determination of the cause of death, a penetrating wound to the chest that damaged the heart. Death occurred within minutes. "What do we have?" Collins asked Sergeant Rodriguez, the first officer on the scene. The call came in at 8:23 p.m. The victim called 911 herself and reported that her ex-husband had broken into the house. The operator heard them talking, then a scream and sounds of a struggle. The line went dead. Collins surveyed the scene. The back door had been professionally pried open. The lock was barely damaged, with no signs of forced entry. The victim's phone lay on the kitchen floor, its screen shattered. In the living room, there was an overturned chair and signs of a struggle. Murder weapon? A kitchen knife found next to the body, presumably purchased recently. There are still traces of the price tag on the blade. Collins cursed himself. He knew Stefan was dangerous, knew the man was planning something for the anniversary, but he had underestimated his determination and ingenuity. Any witnesses? The neighbor across the street, Linda Harris. She saw the suspect leaving the house through the backyard at around 8:40 p.m. It was dark, but she's certain it was Stefan Wilson. Collins found Linda on the porch of her house. The woman was pale, holding a cup of tea in her trembling hands. "Linda, tell me what you saw." "I was cooking dinner in the kitchen when I heard sirens. I looked out the window and saw police cars at Greta's house. Then I saw movement in the backyard, someone climbing over the fence." "Are you sure it was Stefan Wilson?" "The height and build matched. Who else could it have been?" Linda began to cry. "I should have insisted that she leave. I should have made her leave town. It's not your fault. Where are the children? Emma and Michael? At my parents' house. They don't know what happened. I don't know how to tell them." Collins knew this would be one of the hardest parts of the investigation. The children had lost their mother at the hands of their own father. The psychological trauma would last a lifetime. At 10:30 p.m., a warrant was issued for Stefan Wilson. His photo was sent to all police departments in Southern California. The Sunset Motel was checked. He was gone, taking all his personal belongings with him. At 11:15 p.m., his car was found, an old Honda Accord, abandoned in a shopping center parking lot in Santa Ana. Blood-stained clothing and gloves were found inside. Stefan had clearly planned his escape in advance. Carlos Rodriguez, a parole officer, received a call from Collins at midnight. "He killed her," the detective said without preamble. "Damn, I knew something was going to happen. The guy was a ticking time bomb." Where could he be? Family, friends, places he mentioned? He has virtually no family. His mother died 2 years ago while he was in prison. He didn't know his father. He had a brother in Las Vegas, but they hadn't spoken in 15 years. Job? Any connections from prison? He hasn't found a job yet. He kept to himself in prison, didn't make any enemies, but didn't make any friends either. He said that all the inmates were losers and that he was there by mistake. Collins wrote down every detail. At times like this, any piece of information could be crucial. Did he say anything about his plans after his release? Where he wanted to go? Only that he wanted to reconnect with his family. He was obsessed with proving his innocence. Nothing else? Rodriguez paused. "There is one thing. The last time we met, he asked about the procedure for changing his name. He said he was thinking of starting a new life somewhere where no one knew his history." This was important information. Stefan was planning to disappear and start over under a different name. On the morning of June 16th, Collins drove to the Harris family home to talk to the children. It was the part of his job he hated the most. 11-year-old Emma and 9-year-old Michael sat on the living room couch, holding hands. Linda sat nearby, ready to support them at any moment. "Children," Collins began as gently as he could, "I need to tell you what happened to your mother." Emma looked at him with wide, frightened eyes. Michael huddled closer to his sister. "Last night, your father came to your mother's house. They had an argument, and your mother suffered an injury from which she was unable to recover." "Mom died?" Emma asked quietly. Collins nodded. "Yes, sweetheart. I'm so sorry." Michael began to cry, loudly, inconsolably, the way children cry when their world falls apart. Emma hugged her brother, but she herself remained dry-eyed, as if she couldn't believe what was happening. "What about Dad?" "Where's Dad?" she asked. "We're looking for him." "Did he hurt Mom?" Collins didn't know how to answer that question honestly, but delicately. "Yes, Dad was very angry and did something he shouldn't have done." "Did he want to hurt us too?" "I don't know what he wanted, but you're safe now. Aunt Linda will take care of you." After talking to the children, Collins went out onto the porch with Linda. "What will happen to them now?" she asked. "Child services will look for relatives. If they don't have any, the children will be placed in foster care. Greta has a sister in San Diego. They're not very close, but she's family. I'll pass that information on to social services." "What if I want to take them in, temporarily, until a permanent solution is found?" Collins looked at her with respect. "That's noble, but you understand what a responsibility that is. These children have lost everything. Their mother is dead, their father is a murderer on the run. They need stability, familiar faces. I've known them since they were born." The search for Stefan continued for 3 days without result. He seemed to have vanished into thin air. They checked bus stations, airports, the Mexican border. They appealed to the public through the media, but there were no leads. On the 4th day, the detective received a call from the San Bernardino County Sheriff's Department. "We have a body here that may be of interest to you. A man about 35 years old, found in a car at the bottom of a canyon near Highway 18. Looks like suicide." Collins arrived at the scene 2 hours later. A white sedan had veered off the road and fallen into a canyon about 100 feet deep. The driver was dead, strapped in his seatbelt. "Documents?" Collins asked. "Driver's license in the name of Michael Johnson, but judging by the photo you sent, this is your Stefan Wilson." Collins examined the body. It was definitely Stefan. A note was found in the car, written in uneven handwriting. "I didn't want it to end like this. I loved her. I always loved her. But I couldn't live knowing she would never be mine again. Now, we are together forever. Take care of the children. It's not their fault their parents couldn't find a way to love each other right." Greta Wilson's funeral was held on Wednesday, June 19th, at the same St. Patrick's Church where she had married Stefan 12 years earlier. The church was packed with colleagues from the hospital, neighbors, friends, and patients she had treated. Emma and Michael sat in the front row next to Linda Harris. The girl remained stoic, while the boy cried quietly. Greta's sister from San Diego, the woman who had come to take the children away, was also present at the service. But after a long conversation with social services, a different decision was made. Linda Harris officially became Emma and Michael's guardian. The children remained in Costa Mesa, in a familiar neighborhood, close to the home where they had spent their childhood. Detective Collins attended the funeral in plain clothes. After the service, he approached Linda. "How are the children?" "They're coping. Emma has become very mature for her age. Michael sometimes asks when his mother is coming home." "And how are you?" "I'm trying to figure out how to raise children who lost their mother at the hands of their own father. How do I explain to them that the world can be cruel without robbing them of hope?" Collins didn't know the answer to that question. In his 18 years on the job, he had seen a lot of cruelty, but the Wilson case had affected him particularly deeply. Perhaps because the tragedy could have been avoided. Perhaps because the children had been orphaned not by accident or illness, but because adults had been unable to control their emotions. The case of Stefan and Greta Wilson was officially closed, but its consequences would last a lifetime, in the memories of the children, in the heart of the woman who became their new mother, and in the soul of the detective who couldn't prevent the tragedy.